on the traditional lands of the Lummi, Nooksack, Duwamish, the first people of Seattle, Coast Salish, Squamish, Stillaguamish, and Muckleshoot Coast Salish tribes, and we wish to acknowledge them as traditional owners. The Green Building and Smart Growth program at Sustainable Connections works to create a healthy and resilient built environment, and we are thrilled to have you all here. The Green Building program achieves this through community education, just like this workshop. We also work closely with local businesses with technical education and advocacy. We believe that our local business community is fundamental for the transformative change we need for a resilient and healthy future. I'm gonna let some more people in here real quick. Cool. We also have to take a moment to thank our sponsors that make this event possible. Not only do these incredible businesses support our work, but they work every day to design, build, and finance a built environment with a healthy future in mind. The Green Home Tour is the Green Home Tours and Talks is a new event to Sustainable Connections, and we need your feedback. So I think now and at the end of this talk, there will be a link to a survey where we're hoping to have you guys give us some feedback, and one lucky person from each workshop will win a $50 gift certificate to Restore, and then one lucky attendee will win a $100. Oh gosh, what are we doing here? TLS. Rose, help me out here.
Think Local First gift card. So this gift
card,
for those of you who maybe don't know about it, is redeemable at dozens and dozens and dozens of local Whatcom County stores. So this $100 gift card you can pretty much use anywhere to support local.
Thank you, Taylor. Yeah, so we'll have a survey dropped in the chat that we would ask you guys feedback on that. And at the end, we're gonna have, the Think Local First gift card and a whole year of Woods coffee for one lucky survey taker. So that's very cool. So to make this run smoothly, we would hope that we can have videos on and sound off unless you're talking. It's definitely, it's hoped that we can use the chat like crazy, but if you have a question and it's a good time to go ahead and use your voice, we want as much interaction as possible. So go ahead and put out your questions as needed. We want to see your reaction. So obviously the reaction to the coolest green building methods right now would be great to see your faces. So if you want to have your cams on, that'd be wonderful. The best way to view these presentations is in speaker view. So I believe most of you have probably been doing it this way, but that's the best way to see the presentation and Ian speaking on it. And then, yeah, participate and have fun. And any questions you might have, drop them in the chat, and we'll be monitoring that as we go. But I'm going to pass my screen off to Ian if you're ready to go.
I'm ready, Thomas.
Okay, it's all yours.
I even remembered to unmute myself, I think. Yeah, a year plus into Zoom meetings, we're getting better at these. Hi, everyone. I'm Ian with Chuckanut Builders. We've been around for coming up on 11 years now. And I tend to be the person that goes out on, initial meetings with clients and, do a lot of brainstorming with people, and end up in this conversation, many times a week where people are interested in some level of green building. Some people have a really deep knowledge of what, some technical knowledge of what they're after. And I find a lot of people have an aspiration to make their homes healthier and, environmentally more responsible, but don't necessarily know what technical details that means. And we're an industry that changes really fast. So we wanted to be able to kind of separate some of the simple low tech solutions and green building details from some of the marketing that's out there. And there's some very complex ways that you can make a house more sustainable. The goal today is to talk about some of the simple and low tech solutions. I would love to hear, probably in the chat, sort of people's roles and experiences. Are you an architect, or a builder, a homeowner that's done this a bunch of times, a homeowner that's new to this? That would help me kind of tailor some of this commentary. I have, definitely have some slides in here, happy to talk through, but the intention is mostly to be Q&A. So please, feel free to throw out questions in the chats, I'm seeing a comment here from a homeowner that's new to this, which I think is, is going to be great. And happy to talk in more detail if people are interested in getting nerdy with some of these mechanical systems and things as well. Okay, now we'll see how the tech goes here. How's that look?
Looks great.
Thanks, Thomas. Okay, it's the 21st century. We're going to do the 6 simple ways. There's many ways, but just wanted to kind of like narrow it down to a few things here. And bear with me while I get the chat window to pop up here. Okay, there we go. We've got somebody with a question about green flooring. Happy to talk about that as we dive into this. So one of there's a kind of a handful of reasons that I tend to see that people are interested in green building, and like a handful of advantages there. There's the durability of a house, I think is a big deal that gets overlooked sometimes. Any building project is going to use a substantial number of resources and quantity of resources, particularly bigger houses. If you can make a house that's more durable over time, you can think of it in resources per year. A house that's going to last 100 or 200 years uses far fewer resources per year than a house that lasts 25 years. Indoor air quality is another reason that people really appreciate green building details. And this can be both from the materials themselves in a house can contribute, through off-gassing, glues, and various things can contribute to problems with indoor air quality, and also improper ventilation and can create issues in homes. So well done green building will tend to address both of those sources of problems. And then there's clearly environmental concerns that aren't necessarily about the durability of the house or the health of the home, the occupants of the house, but there's some broader concerns, and this can range to materials that are pretty polluting to create, or are unhealthy for the people creating the materials, and there's clearly a carbon footprint consideration as well. So there's a lot of complicated concerns with green building, and several of these kind of simple details can really address quite a few of those issues. On the air quality front, we see that well done details can reduce mold problems and moisture problems in-house, and moisture can eventually can cause rot in a building, which can be problematic. There's a lot of evidence that building practices can lead to asthma, particularly in kids. So we like to make sure that we're coming up with solutions that can address that as well. In a best case scenario, you're selecting materials that are healthy for the occupants, that aren't off-gassing, and you're ventilating your house well. So one of the simplest things you can do, particularly in a new house, but also in any kind of remodel situation, is just build the house more airtight. And I think there's some confusion out there for people that aren't very deep into this about wanting to make sure that a house has enough ventilation. And historically houses had tons of ventilation. If you look back 100 years or more, and houses lasted a long time because there was so much air moving and drying out the walls and the interior parts of the house. As we got further into the 20th century, into the 70s, 80s, 90s, we got a little better at sealing things up, really created a lot of moisture and mold problems. So there's some more modern building science out there that really is using pretty familiar construction techniques, but seals up a house better and then intentionally creates some ventilation in the inside the house that exhausts the moisture and gases that are inside the house and can exchange them for fresh air. The simplest in a lot of houses, particularly in a remodel, is just using good bathroom fans and kitchen fans that will remove moisture from the building. In a new house, you'll hear the term HRV, which is a heat recovery ventilator. That's a more sophisticated, a little more complicated system. Can make sense in a major remodel or a more certainly in a new house. Those are becoming much more common. So that that sealing up the house is a pretty cheap and effective way to make the house more comfortable, more durable, and healthier. And generally we suggest people do this far before they do more expensive things like replace windows and heating and mechanical systems. Insulation is another one of those kind of fundamental steps that is right up there with air sealing. Oftentimes they go hand in hand. Sometimes it's even the same material. We can talk for hours about details there, but I think one of the reasons I like insulation as a strategy is it's usually pretty cheap, particularly if you've got a house torn apart or you're doing a new house. It's pretty cheap just to add some more. It's low maintenance. It doesn't require batteries. You don't have to have anybody come out and do anything. The plumber doesn't come, visit once a year and tune up your insulation system. It's just there for the life of the building, and it's usually pretty hard to change it later. So anytime you're doing a major project, consulting with your architect or your builder on how to maximize insulation. It's one of those that isn't super showy. I mean, it's hidden in the wall, it's hidden in the attic, but we've done hundreds of these projects over the years, and people consistently remark on how much they appreciate just houses are quieter, particularly if you're close to a train noise or freeway or something. They're less drafty, just more comfortable to live in, besides all these other great reasons, for environmental reasons. So, once you've gotten through insulation and air sealing, those are really fundamental. Most projects, anytime you're doing a remodel project, should be considering some of those measures. Even if it's a kitchen, something really small, there's usually some opportunity there. Then you're getting to like the slightly more complicated categories here. Heating systems. In a remodel situation, this is sort of opportunistic. Some people need a heating system in a remodel, and then you've got a great opportunity. If your furnace is, say, 10 years old and you're remodeling your house anyway, there's a cost versus benefit there that may or may not make sense. That might not be the low-hanging fruit if you're remodeling. As a rule of thumb, what we've been finding for the last 10 years or so is most people are very well served by a heat pump, some form of heat pump. And this really is, instead of creating heat using electricity, it's moving heat from outdoors, which is a little counterintuitive when it's 20 degrees out. You can still move heat from outdoors to indoors. But essentially, these are something like 3 times more efficient than most other heating systems out there. There's varieties. This particular picture here shows something mounted on the wall. You can do something that's hidden inside, inside a more traditional ductwork system, just like your furnace. And aesthetically, you wouldn't really know the difference. But this is technology that's been pretty well proven in Europe and Asia for decades and is becoming much more common here. One other advantage some people like is that they generally also just come with a cooling function. So, as we're having more of a cooling season in Bellingham, for those few weeks a year in the summer, you get a little bit of cooling as a bonus if you want to use it that way. These are pretty low maintenance. I have one in my house. You vacuum out the filters every few months. And you don't need somebody to come out once a year and tune it up, which is, another advantage. There's kind of a simplicity to a system like that. We get a question a lot about, hey, we built a house in, the 90s and did these really cool heated floors. Those sometimes can make sense. Those are sort of making less and less sense these days as houses are just getting tighter and they're more energy efficient. You don't need to put as much heat into a house. You don't have these warm floors anymore. So again, if you're diving into a remodel project or a new construction project, there's often a real opportunity here during the planning process to look, look at your heating system and consider if that's a place that you could improve. Hot water, similar, sort of decision point in a remodel. Sometimes you'll be doing a remodel, totally clear, you need a new hot water heater. This is a pretty complex system that we installed a few years back. Not all of them have to have a mechanical room that looks like this, but I kind of like this one just because it was, some pretty tidy work in a fairly complex system. Hot water, generally, we're encouraging people to go all electric. There's a real movement in green building these days to move away from natural gas and propane, move away from fossil fuels in general as an energy source, move to electricity. I think there's some criticism of electricity out there, particularly in that, depending on the part of the country you're in, and certainly here, there still is there's coal. Coal-fired power plants are part of the energy mix, and not as much in our part of the country as some parts of the country. But one advantage of moving to all electric is the energy grid over time can evolve to use more renewables. So, we're seeing more wind come online and more solar. I just did a road trip back from Eastern Oregon, and it's amazing some of the scale of some of those wind farms that have been going up in the last few years. So using electricity for hot water and for heat and really moving away from natural gas just allows that grid to catch up. It's already, a much greener technology and fuel source than using natural gas, and it can continue to move that way. So we see that hot water heaters and furnaces, can last 20 or 30 years in a lot of cases. It's kind of a long-term decision. If you're putting something in that's gas now, you may not have a chance to change it that makes sense for decades. So there's the same technology, heat pump technology, is being applied to water heaters, and space heating, and has all the same advantages. It's just a far more efficient system and a far more efficient technology than we see in either an electric hot water heater or a gas hot water heater. There's also some indoor air quality benefits to the heat pump hot water heaters. Strongly encouraged, certainly in new construction, and anytime this, hot water heaters can be a standalone project too, even in a much smaller project.
Are you monitoring the chat, Ian? There's just a question about why we chose copper.
Oh, sorry. I wasn't scrolling there. I'm gonna, yeah.
That's basically the only one pertinent to you. Just that it looked complicated, maybe simplifying that, and then why we chose the materials.
Yeah, totally. Yes, I think this is a very complicated photo, this is a complicated mechanical room. And there's a few reasons that this one is complicated, and I'll also talk about the copper question here. This is both a hydronic heating system for a fairly large house and the domestic hot water. So on the right, you'll see the hot water tank, and on the left is essentially the two heat exchangers that operate off the heat pump that heat floors. So, this is, I think this goes back to my point earlier, like hydronic floors, which essentially is a floor that's heated with hot water that's pumped through the floor, is a fairly complicated system. And some people really like it, but it's, I wouldn't say that's a very common detail. We're generally using simpler, or we're often using simpler heating systems. So yes, I think that's a totally fair criticism. This is pretty complicated. Doesn't have to be. And this is about this is a 3,000 plus square foot house. So there's a little bit more going on than some houses. Generally what we see in copper versus PEX is mechanical rooms. It's kind of just tidier to use copper. They stay straight, and the exposed stuff like this, I think plumbers often are taking a lot of pride in their work, and it's kind of easier in a situation where it's exposed and tidier. Generally, and you can see in this situation at the bottom of that photo, there's some red pipes going down into the floor. That's PEX, and that's all going down into that's going down into the floor. Generally, anything in the walls or in the floor is PEX. So hopefully that answers the question there. Okay, I'm gonna taking it. We got looks like someone's wanting to build an ADU in this group. That's a question we get a lot. I would say generally most of these comments, if we're talking about new construction particularly, you have all the same opportunities in an ADU. They just tend to be a little smaller. So feel free to email me with questions. We have some information on sort of the ADU process as well in Bellingham. Okay, and I'm going to touch on the flooring options a little further down. And I'll try and keep scrolling here. Ventilation is another mechanical system that, oh, thanks, Rose. ADU workshop tomorrow. I'm not going to talk too much about those, but I think that would be great for anyone considering one. Ventilation touched on earlier a little bit. Historically, people have generally done bathroom fans, laundry room fans and kitchen fans, and they're all kind of these separate systems that remove air from the house, but often aren't intentionally creating a spot for air to get into the house. So, and that can work fine in a lot of houses, particularly houses that aren't super well air sealed. The downside is when you have bathroom fans and kitchen fans running, you're pulling air from wherever there's sort of little holes in the house, and that sometimes that comes from a door or a window that has is a little bit drafty, which can be fine. Sometimes you're pulling air from the crawl space, which is not great, and you've got musty air in there, and sometimes you can have mold problems, and so like that can contribute to some indoor air quality problems. But it's certainly better than not having a range hood, not having a bathroom fan. So we find that the simplest, cheapest approach there is buy some quality fans that are fairly quiet, so people end up using them. If you get the really cheap, noisy fans, people just don't use them, which is kind of a bummer. So there's a couple of incremental steps you can take to improve ventilation and to kind of more intentionally bring air into the house. There's a few ways that you can essentially cut a small vent in the house and intentionally bring outdoor air in that isn't coming from the crawl space. So that's certainly better. It still creates kind of a cold spot wherever you're, in the winter, say, if your range hood is running, you'll still have a somewhat of a drafty house, but it solves a lot of the health issues of pulling air in from the crawl space. A lot of times we see in a new build or an ADU or something where people are able to come up with a more intentional strategy, we'll use what's called a heat recovery ventilator. And a heat recovery ventilator essentially is a radiator, and it has a low speed, pretty quiet fan in them generally. It pulls air out of the house, and at the same time it's pulling fresh cold air in the winter from outdoors, but it preheats it because it has this heat exchanger or this radiator in there that is using the warm air leaving the house and preheating the cold air in the winter coming in. So those are kind of the gold standard for ventilation, particularly in a bigger project or a larger remodel or new. And it just really solves the comfort problem as well. And so you can also add. They generally have some level of air filtration, so people really like them during a smoke season or pollen season when there's particulate to be filtered out. And generally, you're also providing fresh air into the bedrooms. And a lot of people report just sleeping better at night with some fresh air. And depending on the time of year, then you're not having to open your windows. Which this time of year can be great, but if you're sensitive to pollen or smoke, it can be nice to be able to more intentionally filter incoming air. Materials, again, this is one of those that we could talk about for hours, but construction materials have range from, flooring materials, siding, doors and windows, insulation, mechanical systems. But a lot of those materials are produced with products that, especially when they're new, can off-gas inside the house and create some unhealthy air quality. And so formaldehyde is a common material that's used in a lot of glues. So a lot of adhesives that's in plywood and flooring and carpet, cabinets, trim, all kinds of materials there. So there's increasingly more attention paid to formaldehyde-free materials. That's a fairly easy thing to find. Oftentimes doesn't have to cost more. So that's something, as you're shopping for materials, you can, if you get a knowledgeable salesperson, there's a few specialists around, a couple in Seattle as well, that are pretty knowledgeable about materials. But you can also, find some pretty good lists out there. There's the Living Building Challenge is the gold standard for healthy materials, and they've got a very comprehensive list of chemicals to avoid, materials to avoid, and they tend to call it the red list. So they've listed a lot of building products that are what they call red list free. That can be a great resource. It can be a little overwhelming, but people that are doing aspirational projects, that can be a great resource. To address the flooring question from earlier, this has that same issue with formaldehyde in glues is one source of problems with materials like flooring. The other general category is the finishes. So there's, flooring often is made up, wood flooring, is made up of a bunch of small pieces of wood that are glued together, and then there's some sort of finish on the surface to make it more durable. So the glue is one source of problems, the finish is another one. So, and that's where you often get VOCs, or volatile organic compounds, in the materials. And so looking at both the VOCs and formaldehyde, would be a good source. I'm gonna plug a supplier down in Seattle who is really knowledgeable about particularly flooring materials. That's Pater at Green Home Solutions. I know Rose knows Pater, and maybe she'll come up with a link for us as well. They've got a showroom down in, I guess that'd be kind of the north side of Queen Anne. That, they do some decking and tile and countertops and things, but Pater really came from flooring industry and has been really great. And he may be a presenter at one of these, or he's certainly been involved with some of these the workshops and tours over the years. And I think finding somebody knowledgeable like that can be really helpful in sorting through options. A lot of times an architect or an interior designer will also have some suggestions. I see Rose raising her hand over there.
Peter will be giving a workshop tomorrow. I believe his is at 11 o'clock. So yeah, he is a wealth of information, and I hope you guys can join us for that.
Thanks, Rose. No, that's great to hear. Yeah, for anyone who isn't aware of them, I really like working with them, and I often just give him a quick call, like, hey, we've got somebody looking, that's got a question about tile, or we've been buying decking from them a lot. So yeah, he's just super knowledgeable and not really like your classic pushy sales guy. So that's a great resource. So flooring, hard floors, generally we encourage people to look at hard floors versus something like, carpet, has a bad reputation for a reason. There's often materials in the carpet which are not particularly healthy, can cause off-gassing problems. But the other thing with carpets is pretty hard to clean and can harbor dust mites and other allergens that over time can create health problems that don't really have anything, like didn't come with the material. They're just not super cleanable. So, we tend to like to see things like tile, wood floors, marmoleum is a favorite product, and if you want that carpet feel, a lot of times an area rug can be a good solution because it's a little easier to take out and clean or have cleaned. And, paint is a common one, that's more of an issue for the first few weeks and months. Generally paint over time, doesn't release a lot of VOCs. VOCs, but not super healthy if you're living in the house or moving in immediately after paint. And we're seeing really an industry trend towards what they call zero VOC paints, which is great. A lot of the mainstream companies are doing that, but what they're not saying is all the tints, all the colors that they add to the base paint often has a lot of VOCs in it. So there's a few specialists around, more in Seattle and Bellingham. If that's a concern, that you can go to a zero VOC tint system as well. I definitely noticed, just like odor wise, I noticed a big difference in the zero VOC paints with zero VOC tints. There's a similar decision will come up if you're refinishing a wood floor. Say there's this whole range of finishes, from the pretty stinky old school Swedish finishes to some pretty great modern European stuff. And sometimes there's a durability trade-off, so it's worth talking with your flooring person or your builder or your architect about through some of those details. And cabinets are another one that comes up. Some of these are kind of invisible choices. A lot of the local custom shops that we work with will buy zero VOC plywood. On request, sometimes it's a few dollars a sheet more, and a lot of times these decisions can be pretty small cost, have pretty small cost implications. And it's a matter of, asking questions and doing your homework. And, sometimes it's a zero cost decision. It's really just about getting somebody who's knowledgeable to pick the right materials there. Any other questions on materials out there? I know this is one that people love to dive into. We can jump back to this too if anyone has any. So those are kind of the foundational project. Right? There's insulation, there's air sealing, there's heating systems. Heating the house. There's hot water heating systems, and the materials that you're using. Those are, and I try and focus on those because those are the less complex, often less expensive parts of a project. And I would say, anybody who's here and considering a project would benefit from really focusing on those. And then generally, once you've made your decisions on those details, then you can move into some more ambitious decisions, and more costly decisions, frankly, on things like windows. And, there's this huge range in cost in windows. And this is going to be one of the more complicated decisions that people make during the design process. Solar panels are another one of those that are great, and the price keeps coming down every year, and they're making more and more sense. But it also isn't necessarily the first thing to look at. They're not free. That they're fairly complex, and they're not for every site. Some people are just in the trees and it doesn't work super well. But solar works super great in a lot of parts of Washington, partly because we're so far north. We get really long days in the summer. So it's like, sure, we live in this climate that's pretty, can be pretty dark in the winter, but when it is sunny out in the summer, we get really long days. So that actually over the course of a year can really make up for a lot of that lack of winter sun. All right, we've got a question from Myra about windows. So yes, I am happy to talk about windows. Sometimes it takes us months or a year to talk about windows project. There's, currently, like the state of the window market is, you can look at kind of the levers you have to make a window more efficient or not, right? There's the glass, in the window, what we call the glazing unit, and there's the frame of the window, two totally different kind of parts of the window. The glass is sort of the easy part. If you're doing a whole house remodel, you've done some of these other things, and you want to make your windows more efficient, the first step is move to triple glazed windows. So most windows these days are double glazed. We're starting to see more triple, but essentially what that means is there's 3 layers of glass instead of 2. And it just creates a much more insulated window. And that's, depending on the manufacturer, that can be a pretty inexpensive upgrade. There's, in vinyl windows, which are a pretty common kind of entry level, inexpensive window, this can add, $20 to $50 to $100 per window, something like that, depending on the manufacturer and size of the window. So that's, very likely to be the recommendation for, for any kind of window replacement. And then where you start seeing a bigger difference in cost and materials is in the frame of the window. So I tend to categorize sort of like three categories of windows. Your least expensive window is generally a vinyl window. This is a plastic window that is kind of ubiquitous. You'll see these in, everything from, really inexpensive spec houses to some pretty high-end houses out there. Vinyl in some ways is great. It is pretty low maintenance. It's plastic, so it sheds water really well. It's not going to rot. They're not as durable as some other windows out there. Because they're plastic, they expand and contract a lot. And there are some issues in manufacturing. PVC as a material can be fairly toxic during the manufacturing process. Once it's in your house, they're pretty inert as long as they don't catch on fire. So that's sort of your entry level window is, Plygem is one of the brands that we see a lot around here. They make a pretty darn good triple glazed window. And then you'll get into sort of this kind of middle cost category. There are some windows that are made out of various versions of plastic that, some of them are described as composite. So they may have a little bit of a wood component, but it's still essentially a plastic window. There's some fiberglass windows out there as well. And that's mostly what you'll see in that mid cost category. And fiberglass has some advantages in that it can be pretty durable. A lot of times you're getting into better quality hardware, and it doesn't expand and contract as much as the sun hits it, or with a temperature difference between indoors and outdoors. So those can be a great option, but they don't have the look of wood. So a lot of times we want to get into a wood window, and then often that's also combined with some other material on the outside that's more weather resistant than wood. So it can be aluminum or fiberglass are two common options. And that tends to be the most expensive category of window. And within each of those, like kind of mid-grade and higher end windows, there's different sort of levels of performance, which also can impact the cost. And there's, for those of you familiar with Passive House, that's kind of the gold standard in energy efficient building, not necessarily a broader green building certification. But that would be a certification to look for in a very energy efficient window. Would be something that would be Passive House, able to be certified for Passive House. We don't have hours and hours to talk about that windows, but I'm happy to, if you want to send me an email, Myra, I'm happy to talk about it or set up a time by phone, send you some resources there. And my email is ian@chuckanutbuilders.com. Any of you are welcome to send questions by email as well to follow up. So hopefully that gets you started in the right direction on the window question. And we've got some great solar installers in town as well that I don't know if, do you have any of the solar installers presenting this weekend, Rose?
Yeah, we just heard from Callum at Western Solar, and tomorrow we will hear from Ty with Ecotech.
Oh, great. Yep, I've worked with both of them. They're both great. Those are good resources. One other thing to consider with solar is if anytime you're doing a remodel project or a new house or ADU, if it doesn't make sense right now to install solar, Ecotech or Western Solar generally will be happy to come out, consult with you, and talk about what it could mean to what we call pre-wire for solar. And we do this pretty routinely on projects if they're not quite ready to do it. And a lot of times this can literally be as simple as putting some PVC, some plastic conduit inside the wall somewhere. It's pretty inexpensive, and it just makes it so much easier a year from now or 5 years from now or whatever, when the solar installers show up, that they have a place to run their wires that isn't mounting a bunch of ugly conduit to the outside of your house. So that can be a super simple thing to plan for, and I'd highly encourage at least asking the question. And sometimes one of them will come out and tell you that, you just don't have a great site for it. If you've got a bunch of trees to the south, particularly of your house, or a roof that doesn't make sense, it's not always the answer, but it can be. It can be a great solution for lots of people here. How are we doing for time? Are you?
We got about 12 minutes more.
Okay. So I think one other thing I would touch on that, as far as more ambitious options, that isn't like technology specific, that isn't window or solar, those are two of the common things that we see, but would be to pursue one of the various certifications out there. And, there's, going back a couple of decades, LEED has been a big player in green building certifications. They've mostly in commercial. So they've dabbled in residential. We haven't seen that gain much traction around here. But there are some, these days there are some certifications out there that I think make a little more sense if you're building a house. So on the energy specific side, passive house is amazing, super ambitious, and this is originally a European sort of design philosophy where people were really trying to maximize energy efficiency to get to the point of very low energy input to heat a house, essentially. And that's one of those certifications that really needs to be, you need to be planning for that from the beginning of the design process. You can't just design a house and then decide, hey, we're going to go passive house. There's a lot of detail in how many windows you have and what aspect, what side of the house the windows are on, how big the house is, that needs to be taken into consideration. But if you are looking at energy specifically, passive house would be the sort of the gold standard certification to look at. And on the materials side, we see the Living Building Challenge is another very aspirational certification that's taking a much broader view of what green building means. So they're looking, they do have an energy component. They essentially have 8 categories they call petals. I think there's 8, and they're looking at things from the location of the house, what part of town is it in, and the transportation impacts. And they're looking at this, the impact of the building on the site. So what are how much disturbance, how much are you disturbing the site, and what does the landscape look like, and what are you doing with your wastewater, and so a lot of Living Building Challenge houses really are using pretty non-traditional utilities. They're doing rainwater catchment, they're composting toilets, and I think, but they're sort of their flagship I referred to earlier is their red list, and this is a list of materials that really they're recommending be avoided. And it is a very ambitious list if you're going to avoid all of those materials and pursue a certification. But we often see people use these various checklists and certifications, but not necessarily go through the certification process. And I think that can be a great way to get some inspiration and kind of help narrow down your strategy for which parts of green building, what does green building mean to you, and what are where are your priorities. And so the red list is, I think, one of those to look at. And there's a third certification that we're seeing really gaining traction, particularly in the King County area, King County, Snohomish, Pierce County, and that's the Built Green certification. And this is Washington State specific. And it is available in Bellingham. We haven't seen it take off as much. But again, that's another one of those that is similar to the Living Building Challenge in that they're taking a fairly broad view of what green building means. And they're looking at a lot of aspects of it. And they have, like the Living Building Challenge, they have both a checklist for new construction and for remodel. And the remodel checklist out there is pretty dated at this point. I mean, I think it's 15 years old, but And we just went through it again with a client recently, and a lot of that, even though technology has changed, most of that is still pretty a pretty great checklist, and certainly is a place to start discussing some of these options with a builder or with your architect or designer. So I think I'm going to wind this up and open it up for a few minutes to questions if anybody has any more. So feel free to fire away in the chat if anyone has any questions.
Well, thank you, Ian. I know I can say from my personal experience, I worked for contractors doing LEED certified homes and Built Green and Energy Star certifications. And then one day I was sitting at a bar and I found this coaster for this new construction company in town that was proclaiming to be green building, and I didn't know who they were. And as soon as we connected and met, I was completely impressed, and just their ability to sort of translate the information in a way that makes sense to people and speak on everyone terms is kind of wonderful. So anyway, I just want to say that they've really developed a brilliant team. They invest a lot in the professional development and technical training for their team. They did weatherization for the Community Energy Challenge for years and years. So they really understand building science, which is something that I can say for sure, not all builders understand.
Thanks, Rose. Yeah, and I think I try hard to make sure that, to help people understand that, a lot of these techniques can be pretty approachable, even on small projects or lower budget projects. You don't have to do the enormous aspirational, deep green project to incorporate some of these, and we certainly do some of those, and those are fun to do the really ambitious projects. But, a routine kitchen or bathroom remodel, or building a new deck, or, replacing your water heater, all of those have opportunities to make a pretty big impact. So I think it's important on whatever scale you're working at to be searching for those opportunities. I'm seeing a question pop up here from John about reclaimed materials in new construction and how realistic that is. And I think it's a pretty mixed bag, honestly. If you are doing work yourself, reclaimed, either used materials, and I like kind of make a distinction between used and reclaimed. Used materials, you can buy used plumbing fixtures or flooring or whatever from Restore or Habitat, can be great. It's a little more challenging as a contractor to work with used materials because you're paying us for our labor. So when there's the 2 screws that are missing from the light fixture, and we have to run to hardware sales and spend a bunch of time and spend a bunch of your money doing it, that can be challenging. So it's something, if it comes up and you're interested in a project, talk with your contractor and make sure that you're kind of understanding what those cost implications be and which types of materials can make sense cost-wise to use and which ones are harder to use. Reclaimed materials can include things like, something that has been, there's a supplier down in Portland, Viridian Woods, that they take a lot of their materials come from shipping pallets, kind of big industrial crates and things, not necessarily the smaller pallets we're used to seeing. And they will mill those down into flooring and paneling and cabinets. And I think of that as sort of a reclaimed material. And oftentimes, cost-wise, that can make a little more sense that, if you're having a contractor do it, than going to somewhere like the Restore and buying stuff that's going to be a little more labor intensive. Cabinets and doors, things like that. If you are paying someone to do it, are a little hard to justify. Sometimes the reason to do it is because you really love the material and it's really fun and it's something creative, but it's not always a cost savings. So, as much as I wish it was, I love going, using reclaimed stuff at my house, but my labor is free or priceless or whatever it is, right? So hopefully that's answering your question there, John. Deconstruction versus demolition. Yes, it can be totally worth it. This is a similar, there's a similar sort of cost equation to the deconstruction versus just, tearing down something old with an excavator and recycling it. So some buildings make more sense. If you have a really tired old wood building that's just wood, or like wood and concrete, you can crunch it up with an excavator, and there's definitely some construction recycling companies. There's essentially two that are working here that take various materials, and a lot of those materials are fairly easy to recycle and fairly easy to sort with an excavator, even if you're tearing down a building. And then there are some, at least a couple of for-profit businesses doing deconstruction who will come take apart a house or part of a house or something, and they have ways to resell it. And then there's obviously the Restore, which has a crew that we use on just about every remodel project. And so essentially they'll come out to a project with a crew, they'll take cabinets and flooring and light fixtures and plumbing fixtures. And we find that often can save money versus more traditional demolition. So again, it's situational. Like cost-wise, it doesn't always make sense for every material. But I think the Restore is a great place to start. Get in touch with them. You can talk through by phone or send some pictures by email, and they're a great resource. And I think that's generally better to start with reusing something than recycling it if you can. So, our order of operations is get the Restore out there, have them tell us what they're interested in, what they can take. Then we look at what we can recycle. We send it to Lautenbach or RDS up in Ferndale. And so hopefully that's answering the question there. And sometimes somebody else may be able to use it.
Okay, well, hey, Ian, thank you again so much for your time and energy and showing up today along with all of you. We will keep this room open and Thomas will stay here. I'm going to jump over to the next workshop for any of you that would like to join us. Please feel free. Otherwise, if you have specific questions for Ian, I'm sure he's more than happy to stick around and answer any questions you might have. Yeah, thank you so much.
Rose, do you want to throw the survey link in there?
Oh,
Do you want to throw the survey link in there? And then also, I think Rose will be dropping in the Zoom link to the next meeting as well, or the next workshop. I hope that's okay, Rose. I couldn't copy it on my end.
Yeah, no, that's fine. You guys should all have that link to the next workshop. I'm sure if you guys have the one you are now, and there is the link to the survey. I put it in there again. See you all soon.
Thank you, Rose.
Thanks, Rose.